So I'm a junior in college, and walking along the edge of campus. Now, mind you, this is an unusually warm October night, which is quite nice because I know there's a brutal New England winter that's just waiting. And I'm strolling along when I have this epiphany. Now, mind you, might have been a substance-induced epiphany, but nonetheless, I think those count. All right? And in this is a big epiphany, though. I realized that night, you guys know the feeling when you're back in your place of childhood and you're walking along those streets? There's a certain sense of comfort, of familiarity. And what I realized that night, it was the first time in 2 years that I had felt that while at college. I'd been living like a tourist. Now, I have to give you a confession because the honest truth was those first 2 years of college, I hated college. Hated it. But I realized that night something, which was I had missed the opportunity to leave. I could have transferred. I could have made other choices. But I was there. Now, I grew up all over the world and was exposed to a lot of different cultures. So part of my challenge, I grew up in Switzerland as a kid, and then I was in California through high school. So going from Southern California to prep school continuation of New England, let's just say it was not an easy transition. I'm still recovering, in case any of you guys are wondering. Now, I realized, though, so part of it, maybe it was just like, I was taking the weather too personally, which is a hard thing when you go to New England. It's a pretty cold place. But there was something deeper. The irony was I was studying cultural anthropology, and yet I was rejecting the culture that I was a part of. And that really got to me. So something started there, and it was really an inquiry, really starting to think about, am I the victim of my story, or am I the master of my destiny? What do I want to do? Because we always have a choice, don't we, in every situation. And so when I graduated college, it was 1998, and it was the birth of the internet age. Now, this is back in the days we didn't have Google, we didn't have Facebook or Twitter. Right? .com was a novelty, but you could tell that things were going to get different really fast. And through a set of circumstances, I became a social entrepreneur. It's basically applying business principles to social change issues. And it was a total baptism by fire. Now, I had my share of early success in doing this, but I struggled because I felt like there was something that was missing from the conversation. A certain way that we talk about social change that felt kind of icky. Have any of you come across this? This way that we talk about, those people, they're so disenfranchised, those unfortunate poor folks. And there was something about that just didn't sit right with me. But honestly, I didn't have the language. I didn't know how to tell a different story, but I just knew that the current story for how we talked about social change, there had to be a bigger, better way to do this. So for me, it actually took pretty much a nervous breakdown and a physical breakdown after my first career as a social entrepreneur. And as those rising from the ashes, I became obsessed with this question. And this question was, how do you take anything that might be new or different, something that might challenge the status quo, something that might be disruptive to people's beliefs and the way they see the world, and how do you translate it into cultural acceptance? What's that process? I mean, interestingly enough, if you look at every entrepreneur, every innovator, every changemaker today, that's pretty much the question that everybody is trying to solve in some fashion or another, right? So for me, that was the riddle, and specifically around cultural transformation. How does this stuff work? And that's what set me off on the quest. So for the last 12 years, I've been exploring the process of transformational storytelling. And in the process, I've worked with hundreds of organizations, some of the biggest brands in the world, have taught thousands of change makers this process of connecting with your story and how do you tell a story that actually doesn't perpetuate the very thing that you're trying to change. Because there's all these ways we self-sabotage in the process of conveying our story. And I have to say, after 12 years, I honestly still feel like a beginner in all of this. But I'm going to share with you all just a few of the things that have me more excited than ever before about the power of storytelling and the theme that we've been exploring all through the day. So, think of visionaries. We forget that visionaries don't start with the answers. They start with a question. They start with a curiosity, a riddle that they're trying to solve. In a way, they see something that we don't see. Now, before you say, well, okay, that's great, that's a visionary. Well, we all see something that other people don't see. So for some people, you can give them buckets full of paint and a blank canvas, and they see the story. For others, you put them in front of a computer with a monitor screen, code, they see the story. They can program anything in the world. For others, it's movement. For somebody else, it might be words. So we all see something different. And for me personally, the funny thing is, when I look at people or I work with an organization, I literally see their story before my very eyes. It's right in front of me. I see it in movie. Literally, it's like a movie, right? Movie picture. And yet, how the heck do you explain that to somebody else, right? Without feeling like you're nuts. So this is what brought me into this process of wanting to understand, well, how do I get others to see what I see? And then in the process realizing, well, isn't that what we're all trying to figure out? So I want you to ask yourself a question, right? Like, what is it that you see? And we've explored all through the day this question of having a story worth telling. So do you have a story worth telling? Because I'll let you in on a little secret. When you have a story worth telling, it tells itself. So all the performance anxiety and the fears that we have, how's this story going to be received? When you have the story worth telling, it tells itself. Okay, so think about what it is that you see, because that's the first clue to really connecting to having a story that's worth telling. Now, here's one of the cool things. There are 1,001 platforms today for telling your story. We do have Twitter and Facebook and Tumblr and YouTube. You can become a self-published author. You can pretty much take anything that you see and find a way of expressing it out in the world. And I don't know if you guys recognize how incredibly, unbelievably, freaking revolutionary that is. Because it used to be, we lived in a world where a very few elite controlled the stories of our lives. Very few. Right? And what used to be the purview of the shaman and the priest and the elder, it's now available to every single one of us. Which is, you get to actually choose and decide what stories you want to live by. And this is what we're seeing. Right? We're seeing this all around the world in the way in which people are storing themselves into being. And not only at an individual level, but really at a cultural level. So, now here's the thing. There's an aspect of this that isn't always so easy. Because if you think about it, you've got over here, right, the stories that you're born into. And those are the stories that you got from your family and from your religion, from your education, right, from your culture, the media. These stories that basically say, hey, this is the way you need to be. This is the way the world works. And if you live outside of this box, you can step out of that box, but don't think you'll be coming back here anytime soon. Right? We've all lived with some version of that. And then over here, there's the stories that we choose to live, which is, who do we really want to be in life? Now, what's cool is over here, it used to be, now you don't have to live within 5 miles of where you were born. You don't need to take on the vocation of your father and grandfather or of your mother and grandmother. You don't need to take on the faith of your family. But for most of us, we're kind of standing in the breach. Because there's an aspect to these stories that we know, they're kind of the stories of a world that doesn't exist, or parts of it don't. And yet we don't quite know what the promised land is, of where we want to go and how we're going to get there. So that's a really difficult place to sit in. And so I want to share with you from that vantage point, what's the path forward? How do you navigate through that? And the first thing is quite simply to recognize that you can take ownership over your story. How do you do that? Well, you actually go back to this stuff over here and you explore it. We've heard all day, some beautiful, beautiful paths of self-inquiry, right? The projects from Will and Brennan and Andrew and Felicia and so many others who saw that they were curious about something. And it often had some kind of a personal connection for them. Or if it didn't at first, they sort of in the process actually discovered that it did. So looking at the stories of where you were born and who your parents were, what you've studied in life, they actually give you a lot of clues. And we're going to come back to those clues in a minute. So the first piece is own your story. The second piece is actually start using one of the 1,001 platforms out there for telling your story. And I'm not talking about, oh my God, I had such a cool weekend at the frat party, check me out doing a keg stand. It's all good. That's part of what we put on Facebook, and it's how we express ourselves. But there's more. And so every tweet, every Facebook post, however you're expressing yourself out in social media, you are storing yourself into being. So what's the story that you're telling? Right? And to be conscious of that, to be thinking about that. Now, what's also really cool is if you actually find something that you're curious about, you can start, the most important thing of this, quite simply, is start to map and document and catalog some aspect of your life. Some aspect. It could be some really weird esoteric hobby. You could be into some really niche Japanese anime. Or maybe you just love flowers. Or you like to travel around and you're big into jam bands. I don't care what it is. Get your geek on. Seriously. Because in the process of exploring even some little thread, you're going to develop this appreciation for what turns you on. And that process of articulating your story, I did this myself back in 2009. About midway through this arc of the last 12 years, I went through a divorce, lost everything. I was broke. It was a really terrible, hard time. And in 90 days, I self-published my first book, from the first word on paper to having it for sale on Amazon. Now, I don't share that with you to brag. It's a reflection of the kind of age that we're in right now, that you can share your story with the world for pennies on the dollar. Now, it did cost me a couple things. It cost me about 15 pounds. I'm still working those off. And I did eat dark chocolate-covered almonds about the size of my butt. Big, giant bag. Okay? It's true, all right? And I still eat lots and lots of chocolate. But the point is, you can do this, and you will find it's one of the best creative and financial investments you can make in your future. Because as you get in touch with knowing who you are, that process of self-reflection, this is why I believe social media, and I know we have a bit of a frustrated relationship with social media, don't we? I do believe that social media is a tool for self-actualization. It can be. Okay? But it's about the process of self-inquiry. Because what you're basically doing is you're taking your interiority, how you see the world, and you're extroverting it out into the world. You're sharing it with others. And in that process, there's pattern recognition. You start to see, wow, okay, there's a certain angle I've got, a certain point of view. You'll find your voice, as Luke so eloquently shared with us earlier today. So, that's the second point, right? Use one of these platforms. Now, hold on, I have a caution on point number 3. Storytelling can often turn into an exercise in ego masturbation. There, I said it. Okay? No, seriously, it's like crack cocaine for the ego. Okay? Because we have this platform, it's like, oh my God, look at me. Yeah, I mean, it's intoxicating. Damn right, I'm somebody. Woo! It feels good. But we also all know when you look at social media, and I'm not saying anybody here in the room does this, but we have friends on social media that maybe sometimes go a little too far with their oversharing and their humble brags. Just saying. Okay? So, what do you do with that? What you have to look at is, well, we have to appreciate the following, which is we're all not only looking to get others to see what we see, but we want to be seen and recognized and validated. And that's an understandable fact, right? So what you want to look at is when you go back to this stuff over here, which, by the way, you've been running from. You're like, oh, man, right? Whoever our parents are, we're usually running in the opposite direction. It's just how life is. And as we get older, we realize, oh, you know what? There actually was something over here. Maybe I should go back and reclaim some of this. So I guess what I'm kind of trying to get at here is just as you're telling your story to the world, you don't have to be a jerk about it. And what I mean by not being a jerk about it is we can get so excited about our story that we then push it on others. And that actually becomes something that repels more than it attracts. And this is what I saw back when I was a social entrepreneur, the story that we were telling, right, about those less, disenfranchised, those less fortunate. It actually repelled more than it attracted. And in my own story of having this terrible college experience the first couple years, of feeling more like the victim versus the master of my own destiny, right, that there again, I was making this choice of letting the world act upon me instead of me acting upon the world. And I used to walk around with a chip on my shoulder like I had something to prove. Like, don't you see it? It's so obvious. So as I come to a close, I guess my appeal to you as you grab hold of the power of story is just be aware that you are working with TNT. This stuff is dynamite. It can do damage. So be kind to yourself as you continue to ask the questions and be curious in sharing what you're most passionate about. And 2 last clues. One is that the part of your story that's unreconciled over here, that's your greatest source of untapped power. So explore that. And remember that at the end of the day, the hardest story to tell is always our own. Thank you.